Forbidden desires. The heart chose risk over stability. Agent 007. Andrew sat in his office, surrounded by papers, reports, and endless work calls. He was exhausted, but tried to hold himself together. Over the past few weeks, he had felt as though everything in his life was slipping away, like sand through his fingers. But he couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of his unease. Maybe it was the reduced conversations with his wife, her strange glances, or the silent evenings at home. Or maybe it was the feeling that she was no longer the same person she used to be. He and Amber had long since stopped talking about the important things, and their relationship was growing increasingly distant. Andrew had grown accustomed to her quiet looks, her constant work, and the unending stress she radiated. She no longer laughed the way she used to, and even her eyes, once bright and full of life, had turned dull and fixated on something else. Amber seemed to have lost herself, and he couldn't understand why. But on the other hand, he was tired and didn't want to look deeper. He was in a state where sometimes it was better not to know the truth, so as not to break what little remained. One evening, returning home earlier than usual, Andrew sensed something strange in the air. Every instinct told him that today he would discover something significant. He approached the bedroom door and heard Amber talking to someone on the phone. It wasn't a usual conversation. It sounded tense, and something in her tone unsettled him. He couldn't make out the words, but her laughter was unnatural, almost forced, like all her emotions lately. Knocking on the door, he opened it and saw Amber freeze mid-sentence upon seeing him. She quickly put the phone down on the table, and her face changed. It became slightly pale, and her eyes avoided his gaze. It was so obvious that he couldn't ignore it. She was hiding something. "Hi, Amber," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart was pounding. He felt that something was about to change. It was only a matter of time before everything he was trying to control would collapse. "Hi, darling," she replied, her voice a bit nervous as she tried to change the subject. "How was your day?" Andrew closed the door and stepped closer to her. "Are you upset about something?" he asked, subconsciously knowing the answer. She tried to mask her emotions, but he couldn't help but notice the nervous gesture when she hid the phone behind her back. Something about her behavior felt off. "No, everything's fine. Just a little tired," she said, but her words lacked the usual calmness they used to have. Andrew felt something unpleasant tearing apart inside his chest. "What was that phone call about?" he asked sharply. Amber froze for a moment, then tried to appear calm, but her nervous smile wasn't like her usual one. "It's just an old friend," she said with a light smile. "Don't worry, everything's fine." But something in her words didn't sound convincing. Andrew felt she was trying to hide the truth. He didn't know why, but he could no longer believe her words. His heart told him this wasn't just an old friend, and that something bigger was happening behind those walls. That night, Andrew couldn't sleep. He woke up several times, looking at her peaceful face, which was far from what he had grown used to seeing. Amber hugged him as she always did, but it wasn't the same. Her touch felt cold and distant. His mind refused to believe it was possible, but he felt something had changed. He could no longer ignore the signs his instincts were giving him. The next day, when he returned from work, he decided to act. There was no other choice. He began meticulously searching the rooms, and eventually, his gaze landed on her desk, where he noticed an unusual package. It was a delivery, but it wasn't his. He opened it without thinking twice and found something he couldn't quite understand. It was a phone, the same one Amber had been talking on the previous evening. But what shocked him most was that the screen displayed several messages from someone he had never heard of. That evening, when he asked her who it was, she began to panic for the first time. Her face turned pale, and she started explaining that it was just an old friend she hadn't spoken to in a long time. But his heart couldn't take it anymore. Everything pointed to the fact that this wasn't just a friend. In the following days, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling of suspicion that persistently invaded his thoughts. Even when he tried to divert his mind, it kept coming back to the same thing. Something wasn't right. He began discreetly following her movements, unnoticed by her. And eventually, one evening, he saw something he couldn't have imagined. Amber was indeed meeting another man. Andrew was an average middle-class man. He didn't have great wealth, but he always worked to provide for himself and his family. His job was stable but not particularly exciting. He was one of those people who didn't dream of riches but valued stability. His life resembled the routine that gives a sense of security. Mornings started with coffee, evenings ended without worries, and every day seemed the same. But in the past few weeks, everything had changed. He felt that something in his life was wrong but couldn't figure out what exactly. Amber, his wife, was a beautiful woman with whom he had been together for several years. She was calm, quiet, and always seemed happy by his side. They weren't a perfect couple, but their relationship was comfortable. Amber was more reserved, preferring to spend time at home, unlike him, who was often busy with work. Yet he loved her, and their life together had never raised doubts in him, until something began to change. A few days ago, when he saw her with another man, something inside Andrew broke. It wasn't what he had expected. At first, he thought it might just be a coincidence, perhaps an old acquaintance meeting after a long time. But as he witnessed the interaction, he realized something was off. It looked like a business meeting, but a very peculiar one. The man Amber was speaking with seemed serious, and there didn't appear to be any romantic undertone between them. They simply sat, discussing something, but the atmosphere was tense, as if they were hiding something. Andrew wasn't just an intelligent man. He was also a skeptic. He didn't believe in accusations without evidence, so he resolved not to jump to conclusions. He understood that suspicions without concrete proof meant nothing. Still, something deep inside him stirred. He couldn't shake the thought that his wife was hiding something, even though it didn't look like a typical betrayal. It was hard for him to understand why she was behaving this way or what she was concealing. That evening, Andrew returned home, pondering how best to approach the situation. He didn't want conflict, but he also knew he couldn't just leave things as they were. The truth mattered most to him, so he decided to ask a few questions without revealing his suspicions. Amber came home later than usual that night. Her face seemed calm, but she carried a certain tension, and Andrew could see it. Sitting on the couch, he watched her closely. She greeted him as always, with a gentle smile, but today that smile seemed different. Maybe it was just a nuance, but it lacked the natural ease it once had. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" Amber said, placing her bag on the chair and slipping off her shoes. "I'm good," Andrew replied, pretending nothing had happened. "How about you?" "Just tired," she sighed softly, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. She was reserved, as though trying to avoid something. "I saw you today," Andrew said, his tone turning serious. "You were meeting someone." Amber froze for a moment. Her face went pale, and she seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then she took a deep breath and looked at him. "It was an old acquaintance," she said, trying to appear relaxed. "We were just discussing a few things." "It's not what you think." Andrew studied her closely. Something about her words didn't align with what he had seen. She seemed too calm, too confident in what she was saying. Did she truly not know he had been watching? Or was this just her usual way of reacting when she had something to hide? "Discussing," he repeated. "What exactly were you discussing?" "Just life, old times, nothing important," she replied, sounding even calmer. "Don't worry, everything's fine. You know I'll always be with you." Andrew felt a bit reassured, even strange for having brought it up. Maybe he was overthinking things, but deep in his heart, something still felt unresolved. He decided not to press her further, though his mind kept searching for the truth. "All right," he said. "I was just worried that you might be too busy and—" "Don't worry," Amber interrupted, stepping closer and wrapping her arms around him. "I promise everything is fine." But Andrew wasn't sure. His intuition told him she was hiding something far more significant than just a meeting with an old acquaintance. Why did it feel so strange? And why was she so quick to dismiss it? He decided he had to learn more, no matter the cost. Something was gnawing at him, and he knew it would haunt him until he found the answer. Amber had seemed increasingly busy lately. She had long since left her traditional job, opting for the freedom and good income that freelancing offered. She used to work from home, creating advertising content for businesses and managing marketing campaigns. She enjoyed the job because it allowed her to be independent and set her schedule without being tied to a specific place or time. This independence particularly appealed to Amber, as she had always craved freedom. Over time, however, her work became more intense, and Amber started leaving the house for meetings. She often visited restaurants or cafes to meet business owners and discuss new projects. Sometimes, she even traveled to other cities to create content for her clients' advertising campaigns. These were essential tasks that required her time and focus. Andrew noticed the changes in his wife. He used to enjoy working from home alongside her, but now she was hardly ever there. When she was home, she was always engrossed in work. Her laptop was rarely off, and signs of exhaustion were increasingly visible on her face. Although Amber had always aimed high, her growing busyness began to irritate Andrew. He loved her, but lately, he felt something had shifted in their relationship. Their conversations became more superficial. They spent less time together, and even when Andrew tried to initiate a meaningful discussion, Amber was constantly distracted by her work. Recently, another change had come into their lives. Amber's assistant, Scarlett. Scarlett was a young, energetic woman who helped Amber with content creation and managing work tasks. She would come to their home several times a week, working alongside Amber in the spacious office they had set up in the house. At first, Andrew didn't think much of it. He understood that running a successful business required help, but over time, he started to feel uneasy about how much time Scarlett spent with Amber. They were always working together, laughing, and discussing new ideas and plans. It didn't sit well with Andrew, though he tried not to show his jealousy or discontent. Every time Amber and Scarlett sat together at the table, reviewing documents or discussing plans for the future, Andrew felt like an outsider. He understood that his wife was becoming more independent and self-reliant, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to accept this new chapter in her life. At times, he thought his feelings might come across as primitive jealousy. But on the other hand, he felt that something had changed in their relationship. Amber was no longer the same as she had been before. She had become more reserved, less open with him. At times, it seemed like her thoughts were far away, leaving him as a secondary character in her life. Their relationship became even more strained when the frequent trips began. Initially, they were business trips to other cities, but later they involved business partners and project expansions. Andrew tried not to show his anxiety, but deep down, he felt abandoned. He started to realize that his wife was increasingly focused on her career while he was just a part of her life. Amber was often preoccupied with calls, negotiations, and organizing meetings. Sometimes, she had to stay overnight in hotels to accommodate multiple important meetings. It became a routine part of her new lifestyle, but for Andrew, it marked a significant shift that was hard to accept. His anxiety grew with each passing day. He understood that the more time she spent away from home, the greater the opportunity for something to go wrong. Though he had no concrete evidence, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden in her behavior. She became distant, her answers to simple questions colder, and she often found excuses to avoid evening walks or spending quality time together. Her behavior became increasingly secretive, and this was becoming more apparent to Andrew. His suspicions grew, but he didn't know how to act. He couldn't just accuse her without proof. But something was wrong, and he felt he needed to uncover the truth. Amber was no longer the woman he once knew. Her confidence in her business ventures was admirable, but her emotional distance as his wife became harder to bear. More and more, he questioned whether he truly knew his wife as well as he thought he did. Something wasn't right, and Andrew felt that his suspicions weren't unfounded. More than that, he was certain she was hiding something. But what it was, he still had to find out. Amber returned home late that evening with Scarlett after a trip to another city. Andrew noticed they arrived in a new car when he saw an unfamiliar vehicle pulling into their garage through the window. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was a sports car, a convertible, and it looked absolutely stunning. The car was bright red, and though it was dark, its style and luxurious appearance were unmistakable. Andrew immediately felt that something was off. He walked to the garage, where Amber and Scarlett were stepping out of the car, both cheerful and smiling. "Wow, what's this?" Andrew asked, trying to hide his surprise while focusing on the car. Amber replied with satisfaction, "It's our new purchase. I earned enough money from the new project and decided to treat myself to something special." Scarlett and I launched a major crypto business, and everything went smoothly. Andrew was speechless. He was astonished, as he hadn't expected her project to yield such results so quickly. That's incredible. I can't even imagine how much this cost, he said, trying to mask his surprise and confusion. Amber proudly added, I decided this would be my little reward for all the hard work. I sold the old car to a dealer. I didn't want to drive it anymore. There was no point in keeping the old car when I could have a beauty like this. She nodded toward the new car, which looked like a true treasure. Andrew couldn't hide his happiness for his wife's success. He had always loved cars, so the new one wasn't just a pleasant surprise but a genuine delight for him. However, his mind couldn't shake the feeling that something about this was strange. And you sold the old car without discussing it? Just like that? He asked, trying to remain neutral, though something had already started to stir inside him. Amber smiled. Yes, I just decided I didn't want to drive it anymore. It's not a big deal, right? All these changes, they're for us to live better together. Scarlett, standing nearby, cheerfully added, Amber is a genius. She developed such a project that brought in enormous profits. I still can't believe how quickly it all happened. She threw in a few more words, enthusiastically praising Amber, while Andrew stood and listened, feeling an undefined unease growing within him. That evening, they celebrated the success of the project at home with glasses of wine and light snacks. Amber was open, cheerful, and seemingly completely happy. She laughed the entire time, shared plans for the future, and everything seemed perfect. Yet Andrew couldn't help but feel a sense of exaggerated ease in her behavior, as if she was trying too hard to make everything appear flawless. After a few glasses of wine, Andrew began to feel relaxed, and his thoughts grew hazy. His wife's success was pleasant to him. He allowed himself a little more wine and eventually fell asleep on the couch, clutching a pillow. His dreams were carefree, but for some reason, a shadow lingered in them. Not only about Amber's success but also something darker, unclear about her life. The next morning, waking to sunlight streaming through the windows, Andrew was surprised to find no one home. It puzzled him, as they had just been celebrating together the night before. Sitting on the couch, he felt an emptiness inside. Where did they go? He thought. He walked to the kitchen, where everything seemed normal, but something felt off. In a corner, in the laundry cabinet, he noticed something that caught his attention. On the floor, behind the washing machine, he found several items of men's clothing. At first, he couldn't believe his eyes, but then he realized this couldn't be just a coincidence. These were new items, almost brand new, and they didn't belong to him. There they were, men's t-shirts, pants, even a few pieces of underwear. Andrew felt a cold wave of anxiety wash over him. Dark thoughts began to form in his mind, thoughts he couldn't ignore. His heart raced as he recalled all the moments of the past weeks, all the changes that had taken place with Amber. Her absence, constant busyness, and new lifestyle were all too suspicious. What does this mean? He asked himself, trying to make sense of what had happened over the last few days. But he could no longer deny what he had seen. He realized. Now he had to find out the truth, no matter what it would be. Andrew didn't want to uncover everything about Amber on his own because he didn't know how to do it properly. He had an acquaintance who used to work as a detective, investigating both criminal and romantic cases. Andrew felt his anxiety grow with every step as he approached the home of his acquaintance, the old detective. His mind was overwhelmed with questions, but there was no time to sort through all his emotions. He knew that if he wanted to find the truth, he needed professional help. So, despite his inner doubts causing him to worry, he couldn't afford to hesitate. When he arrived at the acquaintance's house, he immediately felt that something was off. The yard was silent, and even amidst the usual rhythms of life, there was no sign of activity. Andrew approached the door and knocked several times, but he didn't hear a sound from inside. At first, he thought the man might simply not be home. However, at that moment, the back door opened, and a figure emerged from the shadows. "Andrew, come in," the acquaintance said, waving his hand. His voice was quiet and barely recognizable. Andrew was surprised once again. He hadn't even realized how to get inside through the backyard, but he agreed and, without hesitation, followed the man into the house. Something felt unsettling, but he couldn't refuse the help this man might offer him. "What's going on? I thought you stopped working as a detective?" Andrew asked, uneasy about the unclear situation. The acquaintance, looking tired and nervous, began to explain that he was currently under investigation himself and waiting for a case to conclude. He was facing legal troubles over some old cases he hadn't yet resolved. However, he explained that he wanted to leave it all behind and focus only on cases that would help him regain his independence. "I don't know if I can help you, Andrew. In my situation, this could be dangerous. But if you want, I can give you the contacts of people who handle such matters," he said, glancing at Andrew with visible discomfort. Andrew felt his heart's anxiety intensify. He knew that the situation with Amber was becoming more complicated, and he needed to find out the truth as quickly as possible. Nevertheless, he decided not to delay the matter and simply shared everything he knew. "My wife, she's changed, you know," he began, trying to explain. "Everything was fine until she started this business. And suddenly, she became focused on other things. New cars, new projects. Then I found men's clothing in our laundry. Now I don't know what to think. I want to know what she's hiding." The acquaintance, listening attentively, furrowed his brow, then gave Andrew another searching look, as if hesitating about something. After a moment of silence, he sighed and said, "I understand, but I can't take on such a case right now. You need to contact a professional. Here's a contact. This guy can investigate everything quietly, without making any noise." Andrew took the note with the phone number and thanked him. Despite everything, he couldn't hide his disappointment that he couldn't start the investigation immediately. However, he felt that this was his only chance to uncover the truth. On the way home, in his car, he reflected more and more on his next steps. As soon as he arrived, he dialed the detective's number. After a few attempts to steady his trembling hands, he heard a calm voice on the other end of the line. "Good afternoon. This is Detective Moreno. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," Andrew began. "My name is Andrew, and I need your help. My wife seems to be hiding something. I found a few suspicious things, and I want to uncover the truth." The detective listened carefully and appeared to have experience dealing with such cases. He promised to begin monitoring Amber and gathering information, but also warned that everything needed to be done very discreetly to avoid damaging reputations or raising any suspicions against Andrew himself. "I understand," the detective said. "We'll start immediately. I'll keep you updated on developments." Andrew hung up the phone and felt an even deeper emptiness inside. Now, he couldn't stop thinking about what to expect next. Had his wife truly betrayed him? Or was it all just a misunderstanding? Only time would provide the answer, but Andrew knew he couldn't back down now. He had to know the truth, no matter what it might be. The following day, he felt each moment growing more nerve-wracking. He didn't know what to do with the thoughts invading his mind. Where was his wife when she wasn't at home? What was really happening behind her closed doors? Andrew understood that his life would change forever, regardless of the answer the detective uncovered. Days passed, and Detective Moreno continued his work, but he couldn't provide Andrew with any substantial information. Each time Moreno called, his updates grew less encouraging, and Andrew increasingly felt that this might be more than just suspicion. Moreno kept monitoring Amber, but every call sounded less and less conclusive. "She's spending time with people I don't know, men and women alike. All these meetings are supposedly business-related, but there's something odd about the way she interacts with some of them. For instance, today she met with a couple, and they locked themselves in a hotel room for 4 hours. Of course, I set up surveillance, but unfortunately, I couldn't pick up anything useful, just some strange noises, but they stopped quickly. It could have been a simple business meeting, but I don't know. Something feels off," Moreno said in one of his calls. For Andrew, this was deeply unsettling. On one hand, he tried to rationalize her behavior, searching for explanations that could make sense. But on the other hand, screams? Why couldn't anyone provide a clear account of what happened in that hotel room? Perhaps they were just filming a promotional video? But why so long, and why her with them? It didn't add up. "All right, keep observing, and if anything new comes up, let me know immediately," Andrew said, feeling the anxiety in his chest grow heavier. With each call, he became more impatient, the weight of uncertainty wearing him down. That evening, when Amber and Scarlett returned home, Andrew felt his nerves stretched to their limit. He tried to maintain his composure, though his mind constantly raced with possible explanations for his wife's behavior. Every move she made, every glance, now seemed suspicious, even if they were her usual actions. She walked into the house with a smile on her face, as always, but Andrew felt the fog of distrust clouding his thoughts. "How's everything going with the projects? Is everything running smoothly?" he asked, attempting to sound calm. Amber shared that things were going well, that there was a lot of work, and that she and Scarlett barely had any time for themselves. This revelation shocked Andrew. He hadn't expected her business to be so demanding. She added that, because of the workload, Scarlett would be staying with them for a while to help with the work. This surprised Andrew even more, but he decided it probably wasn't a big deal. After all, he didn't mind Scarlett staying with them. Still, there was a sense of unease, and his thoughts once again plunged into the dark abyss of doubt. Scarlett, of course, wasn't new to their home, but her presence as a temporary housemate felt unusual. Andrew couldn't help but wonder why, now that everything seemed to be going so well, they had suddenly decided Scarlett should stay. She hadn't been working with Amber for that long, so the decision didn't align with what he knew. What had prompted this choice? "So Scarlett will be staying here for a while?" he asked again, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Yes," Amber replied, smiling again. "There's just so much work, and she needs to stay until we finish everything." It seemed innocent enough, but Andrew still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this arrangement than just business support. He felt as though someone was hiding something from him, and the anxiety ate away at him. He waited for new information from the detective, but days passed, and Moreno didn't provide any updates. His calls became less frequent, and every time Andrew tried to reach out, he received only brief responses, "We're observing. Everything's fine." Meanwhile, life at home carried on as usual, though Andrew felt increasingly tense and cautious. Scarlett stayed with them, and Amber delved deeper into her work, seemingly avoiding his questions or suspicions. One day, while Amber was on a call and Scarlett was in another room, Andrew found something strange on her desk. It was a piece of paper with some numbers and names written on it. It seemed like financial notes, but what he saw next made his heart skip a beat. Andrew stood in front of the desk, holding his breath. The paper he had stumbled upon seemed innocent at first glance, but what he saw made his heart race. Photos of men. Many photos. Men of different ages, with varying facial features, but all of them strikingly attractive. Their gazes, expressions, and poses looked so professional, as though they were taken for a high-end magazine or advertisement. All these men had one thing in common. They were anything but ordinary. They looked as though they might wield great influence, money, or power. Andrew struggled to understand what it all meant. Forgetting for a moment that he had initially been searching for business-related financial documents, he left the room without a word. His mind swirled with countless questions that had no simple answers. Why did Amber have these photos? Could it simply be a collection of images for some advertisement or project? But why so many? And why were they kept on her desk, mixed in with other documents? How did this connect to her absences and strange meetings lately? Unable to bear it any longer, he left the house, taking his phone. He had been struggling to gather his thoughts for days, and the sense that something was wrong only intensified. Now, he decided to act. "Moreno, it's me. I need your help," he said when the detective answered. He told him everything he had found. The photos on the desk, the men in them, the suspicions bubbling to the surface, and his wife, who had become even more enigmatic in recent weeks. Moreno listened attentively. "Understood. I'll watch her tomorrow. I'll try to find out more," the detective replied. The next morning, Amber left the house early, as usual. She mentioned she had a business meeting with a partner, leaving Scarlett at home. Andrew woke up and, instead of going about his day as usual, decided to talk to Scarlett. "Is everything okay with Amber?" he asked, trying to appear casual. "Yes, everything's fine," Scarlett replied, not looking up from her laptop. "She went to meet with a partner. I'll just work from home for now." Andrew frowned slightly. Scarlett didn't seem particularly interested in sharing additional details about their work. He didn't press further, sensing that the answers he wanted might be far from what he hoped for. The entire day, Andrew felt uneasy. What was really happening with his wife? He couldn't figure it out, but a single question echoed in his mind. Why had she changed so much? That evening, just as Andrew was about to lose hope of hearing any updates, his phone rang. It was Moreno. "Andrew, do you have a moment? I want to share what I found," the detective said, his tone tense. "What happened?" Andrew asked, his heartbeat quickening. "Today was strange," Moreno began. "I followed your wife, and at first, everything seemed normal. She was at a restaurant, meeting a man. It looked like a regular business meeting. But then something happened that made me suspicious." Andrew fell silent, listening intently as Moreno continued. "She started kissing the man, holding his hand. He looked important. I'm certain this man isn't just anyone. He had security with him, and it was obvious he's wealthy. And then things got even more interesting. The man handed your wife a suitcase. When she opened it, I saw it was full of money. A lot of money. And it didn't look like the kind of money earned from her business. It didn't seem to come from advertising." Andrew stood frozen, unable to speak. His entire body felt heavy, and he was overwhelmed by shock. "But that's not all," Moreno continued. "After that, she got into a limousine with the man, and they drove around the city. I followed them to a hotel she's visited before. I know the place. They rented a room and locked themselves inside. I waited there for hours. No one came out, but security remained outside the door. Then the man left. And after that, men began entering the room one by one. I don't know what was happening inside, but it was highly suspicious." Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. He was in a stupor but managed to ask, "What does this all mean? What should I do next?" Moreno didn't respond immediately, giving Andrew time to process the information. "I can't say for sure, but it looks like your wife is involved in something serious. And it definitely doesn't seem related to her business." Andrew sat on the couch, his mind racing, when the front door opened and Amber walked in. She carried several shopping bags that looked expensive. Over her shoulder was a designer handbag, and her stylish clothes appeared even more extravagant than usual. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling, but that smile couldn't mask the despair Andrew felt inside. She didn't even notice his contemplative expression as he held a watch in his hands. She simply approached and kissed him as if nothing unusual had transpired in their relationship. "This is for you," Amber said, handing him a brand-new, luxurious watch. It was incredibly stylish and expensive, leaving Andrew unable to hide his surprise. He hugged her, thanked her, and, watching her face, once again felt the pain growing in his chest. Should he be happy about this gift, or was it just another piece of a larger deception? Holding the new watch from Amber, Andrew sometimes felt as though he were trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He stared at the expensive accessory, recalling how things used to be. He and Amber had been inseparable, and every moment together had been a celebration for him. Now everything had changed. She was distant, different, and while he tried to remain calm, the thoughts of her betrayal wouldn't leave him. Amber noticed Scarlett working on her laptop all day, seemingly oblivious to the tension around her. Approaching her, Amber held a brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max with 1 terabyte of storage in her hands. It was an extravagant gift Scarlett clearly hadn't expected. "This is for you," Amber said, handing her the phone. Scarlett couldn't contain her delighted smile. She hugged Amber, thanked her, and everyone returned to a calm atmosphere. Though Andrew felt something in his family had fundamentally changed. Meanwhile, his thoughts kept replaying the scene when he had found the photographs of men. It was so unnatural that he could no longer remain silent. He approached Amber and, trying to keep a calm expression, asked, "What are those photographs of men I found on your desk?" Amber smiled, a smile that only deepened Andrew's unease. She responded as though nothing had happened, claiming they were just ordinary photos of guys she worked with, ones she had brought home to organize. She even added, with a nonchalant tone, that there was nothing criminal, trying to appear carefree. But her words only deepened Andrew's suspicions. He couldn't let go of everything that had been happening. His heart clenched again with pain, but he kept listening, trying to control himself. It seemed Amber wasn't just hiding something but was also trying to manipulate him, as was her style. He wasn't ready to believe her without evidence. Amber suddenly began talking about her desire to change their lives. She shared grand plans, saying she had made a lot of money and now wanted Andrew to quit his job. She intended to scale her business, and it didn't matter to her if he no longer worked. She even promised Scarlett that she would make her the company's director, allowing her to earn significant money as well. Andrew was stunned by the news. He froze, unsure of how to respond. On the one hand, he was happy for his wife, who had found success and sought to provide them with a better life. But on the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too good to be true. His intuition told him this was just a cover for something much darker. Despite all the external success, a gnawing sense of anxiety wouldn't let him rest. A spiral of thoughts swirled in his mind. If she had earned all this money, why did their lifestyle still seem so ordinary? Why did her words lack clear truths, filled instead with hints and vague answers? "It seems like you're dragging us into something bigger than just business," he said, trying to sound calm. But he couldn't suppress his nervousness. Amber nodded as if she understood everything and said, "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. You'll see." But her words didn't reassure Andrew. Instead of feeling confident, he felt like he was sinking further into a murky, tangled situation. He decided he couldn't leave things unanswered any longer. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. Amber was hiding something, and he needed to find out before it was too late. He couldn't allow himself to let it go because deep in his heart, he felt that this secret could tear his family apart. Now, he needed to act. The next morning, Amber woke Andrew earlier than usual. Her voice lacked its usual warmth, replaced by a calm confidence that immediately put him on edge. She told him that she had made all the arrangements, and now he wouldn't be working at his old job anymore because she had already spoken to his boss. Andrew couldn't immediately process what was happening. He tried to open his eyes, still groggy, but realized something was wrong. "Did you do this without my knowledge?" he asked, still in shock. His anger began to rise as he realized Amber had interfered with his career without considering his decision. "Why would you need to work?" "We have plenty of money," she replied calmly. It was incredibly brazen. She acted as if everything was under her control, and he had no right to question her. At that moment, she placed a package on the bed, and when Andrew saw that it contained $150,000 in cash, his shock was overwhelming. Although he wasn't poor, he had never seen such a sum of money before. Something didn't add up. If everything was going so well, why did it feel like this was just one link in a complicated game? But Amber simply smiled cheerfully, oblivious to his doubts. "This is for you, to cover your initial expenses. I know you're not used to such sums, but it'll be enough," she said, which only deepened his skepticism about her intentions. Then she placed the keys to a new car in his hand, the car he had long dreamed of owning. It was an Aston Martin, the one he often talked about but could never afford. The car was in the garage. It was an incredible gesture, but the deep sense of unease didn't leave him. She asked if he wanted to take a few days to forget about all his worries and enjoy himself while she and Scarlett went on some business errands. All these gifts, new opportunities, and their seemingly perfect life didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, chaos grew in his soul. His inner voice couldn't reconcile with the situation. His life was suddenly turning upside down. Something was wrong. That evening, when Amber and Scarlett left for their business meetings, Andrew received a call from Detective Moreno. Moreno's voice was tense, which only increased Andrew's anxiety. "I saw your wife at a meeting. She was kissing a man, and it wasn't just friendly," Moreno reported, and his words hit Andrew like a thunderclap. Andrew couldn't believe his suspicions were being confirmed so quickly. He tried not to show his agitation, but inside, he felt a cold wave run through his body. This wasn't just a random act or a mistake. His wife was clearly hiding something. Moreno continued, "And one more thing. Your wife received an envelope of cash at that meeting. I heard one of the men hand it to her. That money was definitely not for business. I also overheard her discussing something important about the basement of your house." Andrew froze. The basement? It was the first time he'd heard anything about it. Moreno was certain something was hidden there. "You need to check the basement," the detective added. "There may be more down there than you can imagine." Andrew didn't hesitate. He simply replied, "Thank you," and hung up. His heart was racing, and his mind was already at the scene. He was going there. He couldn't endure the uncertainty any longer. Something was being hidden, and he had to find out what. Quickly throwing on a jacket, Andrew stepped out of the house. The basement was one of those places they rarely visited, but it had clearly been a part of this ominous plan for a long time. He walked there without hesitation. The basement was dark, the dampness of the old walls heavy in the air as he descended the stairs. The light barely worked, but he sensed that something was there. He clearly remembered how Amber occasionally emerged from the basement when he returned home, and each time her expression was unusual, a mix of anxiety and confusion. He approached the basement door and grabbed the handle. It was cold. Feeling a surge of tension, Andrew opened the door. The space below was dark, but his eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he saw several boxes and packages scattered across the floor. On one of them, partially covered by an old blanket, he noticed a strange stain. Something was off. This might be what he was looking for, and he was ready to uncover the truth, even if it wasn't what he expected. Andrew saw a safe in the basement. Standing in front of it, he could hardly believe his eyes. The basement held things he could never have imagined. Every detail looked like part of a larger mystery, and now he realized his life was far more complicated than he could have ever guessed. He picked up one of the flash drives and examined it closely. It looked like an ordinary flash drive, but why did his wife, Amber, have so many of them? What was on these drives? He felt this was just the beginning of what he needed to uncover. Every step he took in that basement added more questions to the ones he already had. What were these photos? All these different images of Amber, her interactions with other men, as if they were various roles she was playing. His heart beat faster with a mix of anger and dread. He couldn't understand why his wife, the woman he believed to be loyal and loving, could be involved in such intrigue. Each photo, each glance, each pose in those images shattered his perception of her. There were numerous photos of Amber in different outfits and with various men. "Agent," he muttered to himself when he saw the label on one of the posters. This couldn't be a coincidence. It looked like a code name, or something much more significant than a hobby or casual photos for a private archive. Amber was involved in something that had nothing to do with ordinary life. But why hadn't he noticed it before? How could she hide such a truth from him? And most importantly, what did it mean for him? He stepped away from the safe and began inspecting the rest of the basement. There were even more boxes, documents, strange items, and even some old computers. It all looked like something straight out of a spy movie, where agents operated undercover, keeping their secrets and running their missions against the backdrop of normal life. But why Amber? Why her? Horrifying thoughts began to form in his mind. Ones he couldn't and didn't want to take seriously, but it couldn't just be a coincidence. His heart pounded in his chest as fear crept into his thoughts. Was this entire situation part of some elaborate game he had unknowingly become a part of? How had he missed such drastic changes in her behavior? How had this all happened while he lived in his peaceful world, oblivious to the truth about his wife? The safe contained many odd items, as well as a significant amount of cash, not just dollars but euros, too. He closed the safe, trying to calm himself. His hands were trembling, but he was determined. He no longer wanted to remain in the dark. This situation had long gone beyond what he could have imagined. He couldn't just stand by and watch what was happening. Amber was hiding something, and it wasn't just an ordinary marital secret. Summoning all his willpower, Andrew left the basement. He locked the door to ensure no one would notice he had been there. Outside, the evening darkness had already enveloped the house, but he didn't have time for doubts. He felt he had to act, and act quickly. His emotions were overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't allow himself to falter. Andrew went back inside and, as soon as he entered the house, immediately called Detective Moreno. He needed to talk to him, thank him for his work, but at the same time, he couldn't leave things as they were. All those flash drives, safes, photos, and mysteries he had uncovered in the basement were just pieces of a much larger puzzle. "Moreno, I want to thank you for your work, but," he said calmly, though his voice trembled with tension, "I no longer need your services. I'll handle this myself now." Understood, the detective replied. If you think you can manage, you know where to find me if you need anything. Andrew paused for a few seconds, gathering his thoughts. I'll send you the money for your work. But be careful, there's more to this story than you could imagine. Thanks for everything. He hung up and immediately transferred the promised amount to the detective. However, the question of what to do with everything he had found still loomed large. Those photos, those flash drives, and the hidden hatch in the basement he had stumbled upon. The entire story felt like part of a global conspiracy. But why his wife, the woman he had lived with for so many years, was involved in such a dark world, he couldn't comprehend. He couldn't leave it at that. He had to know everything. Why had Amber betrayed him? What lay behind her double life? He couldn't allow her to keep hiding the truth. He was ready to uncover it all, even if the truth would be painful. But he wouldn't stop until all the cards were on the table. He stood by the window, gazing out into the dark evening. There were no more doubts in his mind. He was now certain that this was only the beginning of his investigation. He would find out why his life had changed so drastically and who his wife truly was. Amber returned home early in the morning, opening the door as if nothing had happened. Andrew was sitting in the living room, his expression grim and tense. He rose from the couch as soon as he saw her and immediately began. Where were you all night? Why didn't you come home? Amber paused, locking eyes with him for a moment before shrugging and calmly replying. I stayed at Scarlett's. We talked late into the night, and I was too tired to drive home, so I decided to sleep there. Andrew squinted, studying her face carefully, searching for the slightest hint of deceit. And why isn't she with you now? He asked, suspicion thick in his voice. Without hesitation, Amber replied. She's still asleep. I gave her a couple of days off. She needs some rest. This answer didn't satisfy Andrew, but he chose not to press further. Instead, he watched as Amber began preparing to leave again. She selected an elegant dress, applied flawless makeup, and used perfume she usually reserved for special occasions. She looked stunning, which only deepened his suspicions. Do you have a meeting? He asked, trying to suppress his anger. Yes, just a business task. Nothing special, Amber replied, adjusting her earrings. Andrew sighed and said, Fine, go ahead, but don't be late. Amber nodded, quickly grabbed her keys, and left. As soon as the door closed behind her, Andrew grabbed his own keys and followed. He was tired of the endless excuses. He decided to find out for himself what was going on. He got into his new car and started tailing Amber, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't notice. Amber drove confidently through the city and eventually stopped at a hotel Andrew recognized from before. He parked nearby and continued to watch. Amber entered the building, greeted the staff, and headed to the elevator. Andrew waited a few minutes, then exited his car and walked into the hotel. He watched as the receptionist handed her a keycard before she disappeared into the elevator. Without wasting any time, Andrew approached the front desk. Good afternoon, he said, trying to appear as confident as possible. My wife just went up to her room, but I left her bag in the car. Could you tell me which room she's in? The receptionist hesitated, but Andrew leaned into the act of a caring husband. Finally, the staff member relented. Room 412. Andrew thanked them and headed for the stairs, avoiding unnecessary attention by not using the elevator. As he climbed, his heart raced wildly. What would he find in that room? When he reached the right floor, he stopped in front of room 412. He listened carefully and heard muffled voices and laughter. His face turned pale. He decided to wait. After some time, he saw a man enter the room. The man was tall, well-dressed, and wearing an expensive suit. Andrew held his breath, afraid of being noticed. Time dragged on unbearably. After 30 minutes, Andrew's patience ran out. He decided to act. Summoning his courage, he knocked on the door. To his surprise, the man in the suit answered. His face showed confusion. Within seconds, Amber appeared in the doorway. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her hair was disheveled. What are you doing here? She asked, trying to maintain her composure. Andrew pushed past her into the room, ignoring her question. He immediately saw two other men sitting on the couch, drinking champagne and looking like they had just returned from a party. What is this circus? He shouted, pointing at them. Are you cheating on me with all these people? Amber tried to calm him down. It's not what you think. Let me explain. But Andrew wasn't listening. He turned and stormed out of the room, leaving her behind. His mind was in chaos, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Getting into his car, he drove home without looking back. When Amber returned home, she found Andrew in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a vacant stare. "We need to talk," she said cautiously, sitting down across from him. Andrew didn't respond, only throwing her a piercing look. "I know how it looks, but you don't understand. I wasn't cheating on you. This was work," she said. "What kind of work?" Andrew interrupted her. "You expect me to believe this is all part of your business meetings?" Amber sighed and began to speak. "I'm a secret agent. I work for the government. Everything you've seen was part of an operation. Those men are my contacts." It looked strange, but it's just the role I play. Andrew froze, listening to her. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Her words sounded convincing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being deceived. "And you think I'm supposed to believe that? You haven't even explained why there's a secret hatch in the basement, piles of money, and weapons." Amber tried to explain. "It's all part of my job. We can't store such things in our offices, so I hid them at home." Andrew stayed silent for several minutes. Then, slowly, he said, "I don't know if I can forgive this. You say it's work, but to me, it looks like betrayal. You've gone too far." Amber lowered her eyes. She knew their marriage was hanging by a thread. Amber sat in the living room, her expression calm yet tense. Andrew paced the room, unable to piece his thoughts together. He couldn't believe everything he had just heard. His wife, the woman he had spent so many years with, had turned out not only to be unfaithful but also hiding countless secrets. "How can you say this isn't betrayal when you were with other men?" he shouted, stopping in front of her. "Love doesn't justify what you did." Amber sighed. Her voice was steady but tinged with a trace of regret. "Andrew, I know how it looks, but you have to understand, this wasn't about feelings. All those men are part of my work. I did it for our country's safety. For us." Andrew let out a sarcastic laugh. "Our country's safety? That's your excuse? You couldn't even tell me the truth before. What else are you hiding?" He sat down in a chair, clenching his fists. "And who is Scarlett? How does she fit into your secret missions?" Amber hesitated for a moment before answering. "Scarlett is my daughter. She was born long before I met you. Her father, we were never married. I didn't want you to know, but now you deserve the full truth." "Your daughter?" Andrew raised his voice, disbelief evident. "You didn't even think to tell me this? I thought I knew you, and now I find out you've been hiding an entire life from me." Amber silently watched his reaction. Her face remained calm, but Andrew could see a glimmer of regret in her eyes. "I had my reasons, Andrew. I wanted to protect you, to protect us. How long have you been doing this?" His voice trembled. "And with how many men?" Amber averted her gaze. She didn't want to admit the truth, but she knew there was no point in hiding anything anymore. "It's been years, and more than 30, but every time, I only thought of you." Andrew couldn't hold back. He slammed his hand against the table, breaking the silence that had settled after her confession. His eyes fell on the watch he wore, the one Amber had given him as a gift. He ripped it off and threw it to the floor, smashing it into pieces. "That was a gift from you, and it symbolizes our life. Lies and shards," he shouted, his voice filled with pain. Amber watched in silence as he stood up and began pacing the room. He couldn't take it anymore. "I can't stay with you, Amber. I won't play these games. I deserve honesty, not secrets and betrayal." Amber tried to approach him, but he stepped back. "No, you've lost the right to come near me. I've decided. I'm leaving." The next day, Andrew went down to the basement, where the safe was. Opening it, he took all the money stored inside. He felt no guilt. Those funds were his as much as hers. He had always believed their life was built on trust, but now he understood it was an illusion. With the money in hand, he went back upstairs, quickly packed his belongings, and left the house without looking back. It was a house where he once thought he'd find happiness. Andrew deleted all of Amber's contacts from his phone. His heart was heavy, but he knew it was the right decision. He left her to start a new life, a life where there would be no place for lies and deception. Would you be able to forgive such betrayal if you knew the whole truth? Or would you leave for good like Andrew? Share your thoughts in the comments.